Welcome to the Aaron Harber Show. I'm your host, Aaron Harber, and joining me in part two of our two-part series is Time magazine columnist Joe Klein. Again, Joe, thanks so much.
Good to be here.
My pleasure. One of the subjects that you write about on occasion, and I know you have some strong feelings, is journalism and the state of journalism. Give me kind of the high points of some of your concerns.
I've done it for 42 years, and I got to say, it beats working. And this is
from a guy who gets embedded in Afghanistan and Iraq.
But you're there, and you're learning things. For me, journalism has been, I'm a child of the 60s, and I didn't start really getting an education until they stopped trying to do it to me and I started doing it for myself. And I've gotten my education through journalism. I've had great mentors. Daniel Patrick Moynihan taught me domestic and urban policy. Richard Holbrooke and Brent Scowcroft taught me foreign policy. David Petraeus taught me the military. But over those 42 years, there have been several distressing things that have happened. Our best natural positioning is to be skeptical. And that's a hard balance.
As a journalist.
As a journalist. It's a hard balance to ask tough questions, but also to accept correct answers. And what I've seen happen, especially since Watergate, especially since we realized that we had the power to tear things down, to tear politicians down, is that skepticism has slid into cynicism. And so it's become the hardest story for a young political journalist to write is a positive story about a politician. It's a dangerous story to write. And I think that the other major trend is this, that when I was a kid, we had 3 flavors of ice cream. We had 3 TV networks. Everybody watched I Love Lucy on Tuesdays. But now we have 1,000 channels of prosperity. And we have all kinds of different news sources who compete against each other for public attention. And during the last 15, 20 years, especially since we've had all news cable networks, we've settled for an awful lot of yelling and contentiousness rather than informing. I mean, there's a whole generation of Americans out there who believe that informed political discourse is Eleanor Clift and Pat Buchanan screaming at each other in the McLaughlin Group.
Well, one of the challenges too, when you have those 1,000 channels, is the competition for eyeballs has escalated and is so severe that the orientation of most of those channels is to say, what do we need to do to get an audience?
Absolutely right. You know, on my second road trip, I was down in very conservative parts of the country. I was in Conway, Arkansas with a Chamber of Commerce, all Republican businessmen. One furniture store owner says to me, it was a big surprise, he said to me, you know, you get to talk to presidents and these big shots all the time. Every time I see one of you journalists talking to them, you're talking about something that they have where they disagree with each other. Why don't you ever ask them where they agree with their opponent? And, you know, when you think about that, that is the fundamental American idea. The fundamental American idea was that the things that we have in common are more important than the things that divide us. Race, ethnicity, religion. Our belief in our Constitution, Declaration of Independence, and systems was what united us. And we, in the service of trying to build markets, have really abandoned that, and to a shocking degree. You know, you'd think there would be a niche market for smart people or for people who just wanted to hear what do we have in common. Like that furniture salesman, you know, the furniture store owner. He's probably a Fox watcher. But if there was a network that really tried to bring us together rather than tearing us apart, he might be a viewer.
Well, I think most people would argue that because of the multiplicity of networks, that actually the movement has been in the opposite direction.
Totally.
And everyone's trying to carve out whatever audience they can. And so if you like screaming and chair throwing, there's a group of channels there. If you're oriented towards the left, there's a group of channels there. To the right, there's a group of channels there. What about, well, go ahead.
Well, we've experienced this incredible retribalization of society. I mean, you know, if this is the golden age of anything, it's the golden age of marketing. And marketing is fundamentally un-American because it sells to the things that divide us. It sells to the niche. But you'd think that there might be a niche for people who wanted to be informed, you know, who wanted to have reasoned argument between people of different points of view rather than screaming matches.
Well, there is a market. It just happens to be small.
But that's all you need these days. I mean, CNN is getting 300,000 people a night. There got to be 300,000 people, and maybe people who buy Lexuses and Cadillacs, who, you know, a really good demographic, a really good market niche for you know, civil discussion and reasonability.
Well, I mean, certainly we obviously, our assumption is our program does that and tries to address that need in a small way. But
let maybe 5 or 6 flowers like this bloom.
Yeah, well, the more the merrier. What about in terms of the quality of journalism? When you look back over your career, what have you seen happen? And especially when you look at the fact that, you know, people blog, there are people who consider themselves journalists who may not subscribe to the same standards that you might have seen 20 years ago.
Well, I blog. I don't tweet. I blog. But what I will say is that there are an awful lot of journalists I know who do incredibly courageous things and work very hard to really illuminate difficult, complicated issues, because they're getting more complicated as the technology becomes more complicated. But at the same time, you see an awful lot of fluff going on. And also stuff going on the internet without any mediation, without any editing, that people take for truth. And, you know, I've met more than a few people on the road who believe Barack Obama is a secret Muslim because they read it in print on this, you know, really official website.
So how do we address that as a nation? How do we address the challenge that where before, if you read a newspaper, if you read a magazine, you could generally assume that fact-checking had been done or that an editor reviewed the story, and now the vast majority of material that's written doesn't meet any of those standards.
You know what? I don't know. But there are a couple of things that I've been thinking about lately, especially since I've spent a lot of time with the military and I see the values that they are imbued with. You know, with this retribalization of America, we don't know each other very well anymore. And we've had a load of immigrants from a lot of parts of the world who have, you know, who haven't been here before. And there needs to be, societies throughout history have had coming-of-age rituals. And for men in our society, for a time, maybe our best time, it was the military draft. Now, I don't think you could do that anymore because the military doesn't want it. And we don't have a need for, you know, more than 1 million at most members of the military. But some kind of, you know, required national service, all kinds of required national service that maybe began with some kind of a boot camp-like coming-of-age ritual is something that I hear people bringing up unbidden on the road. And I also think that, you know, over time, because things have been so good in this country for such a long time, people have lost the habits of citizenship, and it's really hard to have a democracy without citizens.
Oh, I'm going to mention a program we did with Sandra Day O'Connor. When we come back, we're going to take a break, and then we'll be back with Time Magazine's Joe Klein.
Coming up next.
We're on our way out of Afghanistan. Should we even have been there in the first place?
Yes, we should have been there in the first place, but I think that the Bush administration really misread what the enemy was and what sort of war we were dealing with.